definitely have mixed feelings about the word crazy. It's something that I use in my vocabulary or have used in the past a lot. And now I feel like when I use it, I catch myself and I try to have a different word. Sometimes the word dynamic comes to mind, something like that. And I don't really feel like everyone, when they have a mental health issue, is diagnosable or labeled as crazy. But sometimes when we're just casually talking about people doing wild things and we say crazy, it has a bad connotation, and I'm just really trying myself to kind of wake up and not use that word so much. Yes, definitely. Which I wonder if that's a really common thing for many people to have felt. Like, oh, this is something that I've thought, or this is something that I've done. And also, like, in some ways, I don't think that it has to be such a bad thing. Like, if you're being really, like, free and doing something really amazing, maybe that's a little bit crazy, and that's a really great thing. And I can talk about this in a couple different ways, because I feel like now I'm undiagnosable with my former diagnosis. I've been told that. But I think that if you were to come inside of my skin or inside of my brain actually before I did the work in order to change that, I think you would feel like, you know, neurotypical or normal, and then so suddenly it would be like a flip would switch. And I think if you were a neurotypical person, you would be like, oh my gosh, what just happened there? Why is this happening? Like, what is the rationality behind this? And I don't think you would necessarily be able to answer that question, because it was just such a quick switch, like this uncontrollable thing that happened in my brain. My frontal cortex was shutting off, the amygdala was lighting up, and that's where all of the activity in the brain was happening. And I think that, you know, that's not a normal neurotypical brain function, and I think people would be like, whoa, what's happening in those moments where that happens? So in November 2016, I went through some really big shifts in my marriage and in my personal life, and not feeling so secure with a partner and not taking care of myself. And I started to have some really almost like psychosis episodes where I would really lose the plot for a bit. And it was really, really tough. And this happened for about a month. And during that time, I was like still going to school, still going to work. I went to a wedding. I went to my cousin's wedding and like was around family. But I went to something just like didn't feel right. And I wish I would tell other people, or I would tell other people to really, like, if something's not feeling right, to really trust your intuition and seek help. I went to my family doctor. She told me to go to CAMH for the Center of Addiction and Mental Health. And I was in the emergency room for about 5 hours. And by the time I left, I had a packet of information about the personality disorder that they thought that I could possibly have. And it was one of the most freeing things. It was also quite frustrating because I didn't have any tools to like fix that yet or to work on that, but just to be able to put a framework for a diagnosis or put words to the experience that I was going through was actually one of the most comforting things. And I think that a lot of my work doing DBT is around trusting my intuition and trusting my own gut and feelings. DBT is dialectical behavior therapy. So I want to say it's the 1990s, Marsha Linehan, who is the founder of DBT, she used Zen principles to kind of create this therapy to treat people with borderline. And because nothing else was working, people with borderline were still self-harming, still committing suicide. And that had been like the most best way to kind of change the brain of people with with borderline. And I can say that it really worked. I got a year of DBT at CAMH as part of a study. So I went to 2 hours of group and 1 hour of individual therapy a week. And it was like the biggest thing that I've ever done. And then I was monitored for a year after. And then I was like, now I'm undiagnosable. And even now I have like definite, like, when normal life happens, when you're going through a breakup with a relationship or when things are intense and you're feeling anxiety, like I feel like I'm so much better able to deal with those things in like a really healthy way. Like it's still really hard because life can be hard and there's so much suffering and there's people who are sick and we lose the people that we love, and all of those things are still true, but the way that my brain can work and take those things, it really shifted everything in my life. It really depends on the day. Like right now, like today it was raining and I had a struggle of like finding a working umbrella and knowing what footwear to wear. And like, do I wear a warm enough coat? Some days it is like having the motivation to get out of bed, especially in the cold winter. Some days it is really easy to get out of bed. So it kind of, some days it's like, you know, making a really fresh, healthy salad because it would feel easier to go and eat tacos or something like that. So that's my answer to that question. I feel like at this point in my life, I'm afraid of making really big changes in location. I think there's a small part of me that is like, oh, if your brain kind of betrayed you before or like took you down this path before, and now your brain is functioning very differently, what's to say it won't go back? And there is a part of me that like feels like I could go through some traumatic event and it could trigger another mental health episode. Yeah, so I think there's definitely a part of me that's a little bit aware of that and fearful of that. I co-parent a dog. He's 70 pounds. He's a lab staffy mix and he's the best thing. So when I have my dog, I really love to take him to High Park or to take him on hikes or to take him swimming in the lake. He really loves those things. Last summer I bought an inflatable stand-up paddleboard. So it's amazing. And my friend would just pick me up in her van and we would take our stand-up paddleboards and pump them up and go supping on the lake. And it was a really great way to like regulate myself and be on the water in Toronto. And then also freediving is a new hobby. I went to a small island off of Honduras for 3 weeks this winter and I learned how to freedive. And I have like a club group in Toronto that we pool practice with. And one of my friends has a boat and he's going to take us out in Lake Ontario to freedive this summer. So definitely like warmer weather, not winter things. I was just in Los Angeles and my friend lives in Altadena. So we were hiking on these trails with her dog, who's like this 90-pound, like slender plot hound, and he gallops across the trails, right? So we were hiking and we had been talking a lot about snakes and because it was starting to be rattlesnake season and maybe we'll get to see a snake. And all of a sudden we look back at Orwell, the dog, and he has this like snake in his mouth. So we had to like grab him and say, drop the snake. And he dropped the snake and it slithered on its path. That was a really nice moment. One thing that actually just happened to me was I was out to dinner in Malibu with my friend and her director boyfriend and an actor comedian. And we were talking about what I was going through, or I had gone through a divorce and a death and this mental health diagnosis all within like the same time period. And I was talking about it and talking about having a diagnosis of a personality disorder. And he said to me, "You don't seem like someone with a personality disorder. You don't seem like someone who has mental health issues." And I said, "Okay." And I said that I think what I took away from that is that we really need to talk about it because there's such a stigma around it. And if we can just be out at dinner, casual humans talking about it, and I can say, "Hey, I went through a really tough time with my mental health and this is what it was like for me." And because people have this stigma or this idea that this person with mental health is struggling and they can't have work and they can't hold a relationship, or like their personality is in a certain way. But if we can like talk about it to everyone, just kind of like it's a part of us and an experience of us, I think that that's how you can really make a difference. I really try to, like, when strangers or people come up to me on the street, like, and they say like kind of bizarre or out there things, I really try to just be like, okay, and kind of accept it. But I do feel like there's definite things that I have kind of like bit back on, and I don't know if that's like kind of following under like the lines of like catcalling and things like that. So I feel like if I'm friends with someone and they like compliment my appearance, it's like, thank you so much. But usually like generally like walking down the street and someone yelling nice ass doesn't feel good. I feel like going forward, I really want to be a person that people can tell anything to, anything, no matter what they're feeling about personal judgments and things like that. I think when I first got the diagnosis, I felt embarrassment and I felt a lot of shame around it and the way that it was treated, especially in my kind of like the family that I had married into, because we were open with that, and some of their responses, and I also know that I was really sensitive at the time, but some of their responses made me feel kind of ashamed of it and like I was in the wrong and I was crazy, rather than just be like, oh yeah, this is the way that your brain is functioning. I didn't tell my friends at school. I was in this 4-year program, really intense program, and these friends had been with me through everything, and it took me so long to tell them. Whereas one of my friends, we were, all able to tell each other everything, but I chose, because of the stigma around mental health, and I felt like really ashamed of it, I didn't talk about it. And I think that I just want to talk about it now, and I want to keep talking about it, and I want everyone to be able to talk about it to me or to anyone that is in their life that they really love. And I want us to all have a better understanding about it. Like, it doesn't, we should just remove bad from our vocabulary, and just being able to like have these things without judgment, have conversations about our struggles, whether or not they have a label or not. The label and the diagnosis is so helpful so that you can have treatment. But as we know, every case is different and every human is different and every brain is responding in a different way. And this diagnosis or this label is like actually really a gift. Around the time that I was doing my treatment for BPD, I was also working with a man by the name of Michael Stone, and he was a meditation teacher, and he was bipolar, and he helped me so much. But he wasn't public about his diagnosis, and then he died in the summer of 2017 by overdose. And then it kind of opened up this conversation in the yoga and Buddhism community around mental health and why he felt like he would tell his diagnosis on like maybe a personal level to people. Like, we talked about it so much, and his experiences were so helpful for me. And I also like to think that my experiences were really helpful for him as well. But he didn't just like sit up, and he would talk about like anxiety or depression or moods. He would talk more about moods, but never like, hey, I'm bipolar and I'm also a meditation teacher. And this is something with my brain chemistry, and this is my journey and my path. And I think that more than anything, that's inspired me to really see that and be able to hold that, and to say, hey, like I really struggled with borderline personality disorder, and there's also like some really amazing things about it. And that's also one part of me. Like I'm also an osteopath, and I'm also like a really caring, like vibrant friend. And I'm also a freediver and a stand-up paddleboarder and a dog mom. And these are all different facets of my personality. And there's something so amazing to have that like diagnosis of a disordered personality, so that you can learn how to put the pieces back together, or just together in a different way so that you can function differently. I feel like also like, you know, beat the stigma, talk about these things, but also know that neuroplasticity is real, and we can change the way that our brains function. That's like, I think, the take-home message. Neuroplasticity is real. Like, you can change.